Welcome to everybody. Thank you very much for you being here, especially to the panelists, but especially to you, the audience. I know it's been a long day already. Thank you for your patience and resilience in sticking it out. We've heard from the Commissioner there a long but interesting introduction to our subject, a subject which has a question mark at the end of it. You may have noticed going beyond EU conditionality question mark. But to get started, I thought we'd just lose the question mark for a moment. And I'd like each of you, just briefly, we have just under an hour, we must finish by 6:25, so we have pretty much an hour to discuss, and there's a lot of us. And I'd also like, to repay you for your patience, the audience, to give you an opportunity also to ask questions. But let's jump to the panel now. Just as a first round of questions, let's lose the question mark. What is your vision, each of you, regarding the rule of law of the European Union, assuming we've solved this in some wonderful and miraculous issue? Gwendolyn, perhaps you'd like to go first.
I'm sorry, I didn't get it. What?
If there's the question, what's your vision of the European Union in a few years' time when this question of conditionality has been solved?
I'm sorry, is this functioning?
Not yet, hang on.
Now?
Is this, yes, this one.
This one is? Okay. I find it a strange question. I think you deal with the problems when they are, and you. We are in a very troubled moment, so future can be as pessimist as it can be optimist, and I would feel very uncomfortable to make a great prophecy on this. We are facing next election in a very troubled moment where we have not resolved the situation in Hungary, not in Poland. We have other countries going a bit rogue from time to time, member states. So the general state is not good. On the other hand, we have been facing for the first time during this term the rule of law situation for the first time. It has been said, Commission has installed this rule of law report every year. I'm not completely satisfied with it, but it does exist. Council has started putting it as a priority in most of its discussion. I mean, we need to remember that for a long time, for decades, EU was never about rule of law, even if it's at the basic of the project and of the treaties. And you do have, in the circumstances of the discussion on enlargement and of the Ukraine, the very big concern of a number of member states: can we enlarge? Can we welcome Ukraine and Moldova and all of this with a rule of law problem? So the challenges are there, they are faced for the first time, and they have been, for the first time, tools put in place, not only the Article 7 process, but the conditionality. So this is place for hope, but on the other hand, we also have let Hungary gone so far today and be a model for other I mean, Orban has been a model for other member states to know exactly what to be done. I often say that you had two models in 2019. You had Orban or UK. And UK has shown that the worst thing that you can do is go out. This is really not clever. You should never go out. You should, as the Orban government did, you should stay in and keep all the advantages and not abide the rules. And I think that it can be a model for other member states that can destroy EU from the inside on the long term. But if political courage is there, not only on conditionality, but other tools that are there, if you do have political courage, then we can hope for a EU that has really put in the heart of its project rule of law.
So an EU at its heart, with the rule of law at its heart. Your vision, Boris.
Well, Well, I will not go into specifics of the EU as it stands now. I'll just spit out some generalities. I would like the EU of the future to be united as an association of equals. United meaning we've already lost England. I hope we will not lose others, and I would recommend that we refrain from any measures, reforms, or decisions that increase tensions between member states and the European institutions. Association of equals meaning I hope we can resist the urge to create a European Union with 2 or 3 class membership status. There is an initiative right now to achieve that. I think it's a very bad idea. It would create a power center of essentially Western European great powers. The others would be economically and politically dependent on them, but the powerful Western European center would get rid of the constant nagging of these Eastern Europeans that always complain about something. I would like the EU to be liberal, meaning in the classical sense, as little regulation and bureaucracy as possible. Unfortunately, if the EU stands for anything, it's regulation and bureaucracy. They keep adding on new layers, and the rule of law mechanism is an example for that. I would like it to be democratic, meaning that if I go and cast my vote in the national election, I would like it to mean something. But in the context of ever more powers and competences moving to Brussels, the decision of voters at home in the member states means less and less, because the capacity of member states to make important decisions independently keeps shrinking. So I hope the democratic principle will not get hollowed out by the EU on a national level or by the powers in the EU proposing such reforms. And I think that is, and I want an EU that is rich and competitive on the global markets. Unfortunately, EU decisions tend to increase the cost of business for European companies, thus making them less competitive on global markets, and that's about it.
Thank you. John, next, please.
Thank you so much, Nick. Let me first say that I'm delighted to be here. And this event was mentioned today on Politico Playbook, which is basically the most important Brussels bubble publication. And the fact that there are so many European commissioners speaking here underlines very much what's at stake, but also what is the interest of the EU institutions in this. To get to your point, Nick, I'll keep it very brief. My Europe without question marks is one that is a cooperation of member states and citizens working together for prosperity and peace. This means that you complying with the law that is politically agreed is necessary, and it's also then necessary to enforce what has been agreed. And for that, it is very important to simply have member states that work together according to the principles laid down in the EU treaties, which includes loyal cooperation, which is an expensive word for good faith. It also means that you have to be honest about the procedures that you have actually agreed upon, and that includes that in fact it's the member states that are co-legislators, and therefore the traditional blame Brussels reflex is actually pointing in the mirror, because you were there yourself at the table. And I think it's important, including for journalists like yourself, to make that sharp point all the time, that whenever a member state criticizes something that happened in Brussels, it's basically criticizing itself.
Thank you. Beyond conditionality, your vision, Marta, very briefly.
Thank you. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here, and particularly here in this space, in the Central European University, where we have so many important debates, but sadly no students now. I don't think we're going to move beyond conditionality. Conditionality for me means that there's a set of values that we've all signed up to, that we hold dear, we respect them, and there's actual mechanisms to remind those of us who don't do it organically out of their own volition. So, and I don't think we're moving beyond conditionality. In fact, I think the way things are, conditionality will be very much a part of the way the EU is going to take certain values or initiatives seriously. So we're talking about rule of law conditionality here when it comes to Hungary. And I very much hope that this issue will be settled in a positive way with meaningful, tangible results for Hungarian citizens and eventually all EU citizens. But in order to preserve the idea, the desire of prosperity and trust and peace, we need to have mechanisms to resolve whenever there's conflict. And conditionality is a way to do that. And so what I think might happen is that we learn from the instant case of Hungary and the conditionality regulation, and we take away lessons. And that will help us to get it right, not only this time, as I'm hoping, but for the next time too, so that it works. I think there's a lot of procedural issues here. How can we make sure that these mechanisms are fair, they're transparent, that they yield results, that these results stick, that they're sustainable, that we have solid evidence to know what are the problems, so that we would have a free, plural media, thriving civil society, good academics, concerned, active citizens and institutions that do their job. If things go wrong, that they have an alert mechanism that works and can get the institutions to act. And I think the Hungarian case has given us quite a lot to learn from. So I'm hoping that this learning will translate into a general condition or a general regime of conditionality, where certain values and basic core issues that the EU has agreed to, and those are still, I think, very much true. They're not externally imposed, they're real, they're ours. Democracy, human rights, equality, human dignity, that these will permeate all policy areas, and that we as citizens and civil society will be able to work with this set of an evolving toolbox. So I hope that conditionality stays with us, and the actors who make it work also stay strong.
Thank you very much. And Laszlo, before I ask you for your vision, I'd just like to, I think, especially as this is the last session, just to mention in passing, because I think it's relevant to our discussion here, a couple of things I've noticed during comments from other participants at previous panels today. The mayor of Budapest, Gergely Karácsony, said in his speech this morning, we must treat one another with dignity and respect. I think these are obviously core EU values, which I'm sure we would all agree on, that we should engage in dialogue and interaction beyond our comfortable circles. There's a need for more discussion, more dialogue like this in Hungary. Also, two biblical quotations I picked up during the course of today. One was from Margaret Atwood in her contribution this morning, who said if she ever had the opportunity to sit down with Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, she would like to discuss with him the parable of the Good Samaritan, to be kind, to love one's neighbour. And Gladden Papin's comment on Hungarian government policy towards Ukraine and towards the conflict in Ukraine, the war on Ukraine, that Hungary's policy, in his words, was a voice crying in the wilderness. So, interesting comments there. Laszlo, your vision of the future of Europe beyond conditionality.
Thanks a lot. Let me start with agreeing with Marta that conditionality is important, and it's very important that it stays perfected, even we are in Central Europe, so even a soft conditionality can have effect on politics and actually on political developments. The best example is the soft conditionality of the Helsinki Accord of 1975 that was used as a tool for democratic opposition in Eastern and Central Europe. So I wouldn't underestimate in any way the importance of conditionality. But we are again in Eastern Europe, and there are three reasons why I think that there is an importance to go beyond conditionality, so by agreeing that that's very important. One is that we are in Hungary, and then we have our colleagues also in Poland, two countries that were exposed to conditionality for at least a decade, conditionality mechanism, and they got A- and B+ on rule of law and democracy in 2004, and in 5 or 6 years after that, they were on the road to autocracy and busy in undermining elementary institutions of the rule of law. So that's one thing. The other thing is that not everything is legal, not everything is by law. So the autocrats are in power because they know how to cheat, not just the legal institutions, but also democratic institutions, how they can tilt the playing field against the opposition or those who would fight for democracy. And this is what they do. And so those who care about democracy and the rule of law have to go beyond the legal and institutional aspects and look at what is done, for example, with just one example is funding political parties, how the European Union's money in cohesion funds, for example, are used to make firms, municipalities, civil society organizations dependent on the central government, how Marta might know much about that, how the government tries to take away the last independent sources of revenues from civil society organizations. So that will be a key question, I think, in the coming years, how to go beyond conditionality in that sense. The other thing is that punishing or sanctioning autocrats is fine. But it doesn't work if you don't support Democrats. So the other side is at least as important, is to strengthening the independence of non-state actors, of municipalities. There was a panel here this morning on financial support for municipalities, which everyone called as sites of democratic experimentation. The EU gives peanuts to them and gives the central governments the monies that they can use to sanction municipalities in which not Fidesz voters, not the Fidesz won the elections. And the same is with firms. Now we are in a system in which loyalty is part of getting resources, either state procurement or in EU funding. And until this is the situation, it's very hard to imagine a level playing field in which firms or economic actors can decide who they would like to support. So I can go on, the same with civil society. The point is that without supporting the Democrats who can fight from within and from below, for that it will be very hard to regain democracy.
Thank you very much. I ran Vera Jourova's speech through an AI system to get a transcript of it before I came here. Rule of law came out. You might be interested as rule of flaw. But in order to clarify exactly what we're talking about here, John, I wonder if you would like to define for us whether conditionality, is this a moral question? Is it a political question? The government side here would often say that it's actually being used as a political question because the people in Brussels don't like us. Is that true?
Thanks a lot. I like this role of being the ChatGPT to the Jourova speech, so I'll give an executive summary of for non-lawyers. So there's 3 different instruments that currently link cash to the rule of law. And it's very important, and that would be my hope, that would be also your takeaway, is that two of the most important ones have a rationality that is really hard economics. It's accountants with thick glasses and big calculators looking at the world. That's also what's the legal basis of these, and that's sound financial management, and that is really an expensive word for, do I get bang for my buck? And in this case, the rationality of having applied these to both Poland and Hungary is that at the moment these things are suspended. It's also really important to understand suspend. It's not punish. Suspend means we hold it on the shelf until we know for sure that the EU citizens in the countries are actually going to be the beneficiaries rather than other people. So this is the economic rationality that she was talking about with regard to the general regime of conditionality. So she didn't actually mention the word rule of law because the legal basis is economic. And the other way that cash is currently being linked to standards that can be characterized as rule of law standards. So we're talking about making sure that you have a system in place that does avoid crimes like corruption, that you have magistrates in place like prosecutors and judges who make sure that if such a crime is committed, that it is actually being prosecuted and handled. So that is the reason why these things are now suspended. Just one footnote, she was also mentioning this expensive thing called Common Provision Regulation, which the ChatGPT version of this would really be, you can only spend money in a way that's legal. And the Charter of Fundamental Rights that she was mentioning is primary union law, so that's the highest law that we have, and that includes fundamental rights standards. And the reason why this is now an issue with regard to both Poland and Hungary is that one of the rights that is laid down in this highest level is the right to a fair trial. You can only have a fair trial if you go to court, if you have an independent and impartial judge. So what and the rationality for blocking cash from the EU at the moment, I mean, again, it's blocking. It's there. It's still for Hungarian citizens. It's just waiting for them to have this problem solved. And that is really a different rationality. It's not an accountant rationality, but it's a rationality of making sure that you can legally disburse this, because otherwise you would violate another norm. And the reason why this is important, Nick, is otherwise people could actually go to court. So it would also be a legal problem for the Commission. If they disperse money in a way that would violate somebody's right, then they would bring themselves in a vulnerable position.
Thank you. Boris, when I invited you to take part in this panel, we had a brief exchange of emails, and without disclosing emails, I know that has political problems historically. One of the questions I put was, why was conditionality necessary? And you suggested that we cross out the why. In other words, was conditionality necessary? Before I actually put the question, though, I think many of us in the room are very much aware, mourning today the passing of Laszlo Solyom, a key figure in the rebuilding of democracy and the rule of law in Hungary, and then, of course, president from 2005 to 2010. Peter Tölgyesi was interviewed on Partizan a couple of days ago, a popular program, to describe what Laszlo Solyom had contributed and what has happened since he was removed as president, or he wasn't invited to take another term. And the main point, I think, that came out of that was the structures, the rule of law structures that were built, the idea of a láthatatlan alkotmány, an invisible constitution in Hungary, based on the law of precedent. Throughout the 90s and the early 1990s and the early 2000s, that these were the basis of the rule of law in Hungary. And if today we are speaking, as we are, about the conditionality, in a way it's because those were surely dismantled by the Fidesz government in the name of creating a new constitution in 2011. I'm not asking you to speak for the government. I know you're not here for the government. But surely this is a problem of Hungary's own making, of the current government, by dismantling that system of checks and balances, of conditionality, which Laszlo Solyom's name is associated with.
Thank you, Nick. You have now become a speaker on the podium rather than a moderator, but valid points, legitimate points. Yeah, I said, why don't we drop the why? But I could also have said, why don't we drop the word needed and in fact keep the why and ask why was it introduced? Rather than why was it needed. I don't think it was needed. I do think it's a pertinent question to ask why was it introduced. And we have this battle of the narratives where the National Conservative side says we are being blackmailed and pressured for political reasons, and the EU side says no, this is an accountant's work, this is about protecting taxpayers' money. I think that question can be settled, in fact, if we read research papers from the think tanks that came up with the idea in the first place. So beyond the public narrative, you can read there, black on white, that yes, they say, obviously, this conditionality mechanism will have a federalizing effect on European structures. So yes, it is an instrument to federalize European institution structures. There is no disagreement between national conservatives and proponents of the conditionality. The only difference is that people who cherish national sovereignty don't like it, and others like it. Proponents of a European sovereignty like it. Also, new proposals that we now have on the table to go beyond these reforms, widen conditionality, do away with the veto, etc. This all goes in the same direction of creating a more centralized European Union, and it goes hand in hand with calls for the European Union to become a geopolitical player, and it comes from the same source. France came up first with the conditionality idea, and France was the country to say the EU needs to become a superpower. It needs to be able to act in essentially like a nation state comparable to the US, China, or Russia. And so I think it's quite clear that this whole conditionality does have one aim to deepen integration, to diminish the power of nation states and increase the cohesion, as it were, of political cohesion of European Union structures. That is that. And for your remarks about Laszlo Solyom, highly respected figure, I think, by everyone in Hungary. I keep answering to these type of questions, also about the situation of the media market. We have to see things in perspective. Where did we come from at the regime change when we did not have any semblance of an even playing field? The power structures were still in the hands of socialist operatives in the media, in the judiciary, and that told 4 years later when we had the next elections. And you have to see the attempt of Fidesz to counter this uneven playing field, to do something about it as a reaction to the situations we had post-regime change. And I keep saying also for the situation of the media markets, my hope is that we will, it's like the movement of a pendulum. We came from here, we now go there, and we will return to a more centrist world. That is my hope.
Thank you. So this vision there very much of a very different, this clash of visions in a way that we're seeing through today and on this panel. Laszlo, you wanted to get back, you wanted to pick something up there?
Just briefly, I think we have a different understanding of what federalism is. Because you identify federalism, if I understand you correctly, with centralization of power, a sort of super state. And I think that's misleading. The federalism, and in general, actually that is missing from Europe. If you ask for vision, then going towards something that can safeguard two things. One is that in areas in which member states pool their sovereignty, then this pooling will be managed in a way, or governed in a way that serves the interest. That's one thing. And in areas, and there's a second thing, where they don't want to pool, then they have defenses for their sovereignty. So it's both understanding of sovereignty are involved in federalism. One is that where you pool, where you decided to pool, like in economic or whatever issues, then that will serve all members' interests. And then if they don't want, so it's what I would like to state, it's not equaling federalism with centralization. It's a little misleading. And actually the Eurovas talk was talking about this the first aspect of pooled sovereignty, meaning that in economic issues we pooled sovereignty, we introduced market correcting measures that basically transfer monies for that, and we would like to make sure that this is not stolen away. So something like that. That's basically belongs to. It's not centralization, moving to the central super state, but it's about taking care of one aspect of a system that is neither really federal nor really confederal. It's a mixture.
Thank you.
I think we can just, I think we can, we're playing on words here, and we can agree that there is a dynamism that goes towards giving more powers and competences to European institutions and less powers to nation states. And if we can just agree on that, that will advance our discussion.
Just one, yes, it's less power, but not, so basically sovereignty, if it is understood as the right to manipulate citizens' rights, then in that case, yes.
Marta, referring to your work with the Helsinki Committee, we're talking here about the rule of law. The Helsinki Committee stands up for the rights of many people, including the rights of migrants and refugees. How would you reflect on this discussion from your work, in terms of how important is the European Union to you, this discussion of conditionality in your work in Helsinki, standing up for fundamental human rights of individuals?
Normally, as a human rights organization, your focus is on individuals, but you need well-working democratic systems. You need the rule of law so that individuals can feel empowered, they can feel at peace, and if there is some conflict, either with the authorities or with other citizens or other actors, they can turn to the courts. And this is an ideal system. Probably there is no perfect system in reality. So you'd find human rights organizations in every country, right? They have a very important role to play. What we've seen in the Hungarian trajectory is that you need a human rights organization to start using tools, safety nets, in the interest of being able to assist citizens to find remedies. Either whether they're refugees seeking safety or access to a fair procedure in Hungary, whether it's Hungarian citizens. Doesn't really matter as long as you have a place to turn to. But as these places are crumbling, are being eroded in Hungary, you have to also look beyond your domestic system. And thankfully, in the European Union, in this member state, we're still living in a pretty padded, luxurious, and highly sophisticated environment where you can, as a human rights lawyer or a citizen, engage with institutions that are not only within Hungary, but in the Council of Europe system. You can turn to the European Court of Human Rights, and as an EU citizen, you can use the EU framework to sometimes your advantage, sometimes it's not to your advantage. So of course, we're looking at this as an opportunity to strengthen the rights of individuals and groups. I wish it would not only be citizens, but also private sector actors who would see this, and who absolutely also benefit from the EU framework, the legal and the policy framework, the economy, the open economies, that the single market, but they don't seem to be at least as vocal about holding on to the rule of law principles. But for our point of view, it is extremely important because this is something that helps citizens retain their rights, and also that rights are actually turned into judgments, and judgments can turn into reality. And I think this is the most important. So once you can't trust Hungarian courts to the full extent that you should, there's still the EU's Court of Justice to look to. Of course, it's much more complicated than that, but it does provide a layer of security. And I think this is something that we citizens very often don't appreciate, that once the oxygen is becoming scarcer in Hungary, there's still the European space that helps us potentially replenish that. And I think this is a realization that is not only happening in Hungary, but also elsewhere around the EU. So from my work within the Hungarian Helsinki Committee and also with other human rights groups around Europe, I think there is an increasing willingness, a desire, an appetite to work together on EU issues exactly because of this. National systems are under pressure, but together we hope to fortify whatever there is, expand, and also preserve at EU level.
Thank you. Gwendolyn, in the Commissioner's contribution at the beginning of our panel, she said that the rule of law is not a magic wand. She said that we have a plethora of tools. The key is choosing the right tool for the specific problems. Do you think in that sort of relationship between the Commission and the European Parliament, was she referring to the Green Group, yourself, others, as your frustration perhaps sometimes with the Commission that you want the rule of law issue, the conditionality to be a magic wand which would solve everything?
No, I think that Vera Jourova and me on this are very on the same page, and we are a bit different to most of the people. I've always said that the conditionality, because she doesn't say the rule of law is not the magic one, she says conditionality is, and I've always said that. I'm a big defender of the complementarity of the tools and that you must use all of them. Infringement procedures from the Commission on very specific things. I think that on media, things could have been done much earlier, on justice, of course. The Article 7 process that has been often overlooked as a useless process. Well, of course, it has not been used effectively. So when you have a tool and you keep it in a drawer, it's not being used very well, but it does exist. And in fact, I think that if there was not Article 7 in the case of Hungary and Poland, there would be no conditionality. This was the base for it. This what made it legitimate, because I think I'm very clear on this. I think that the situation in Hungary is dire. It's the worst that we can find today in the EU, very clearly, but there are issues in a number of other member states, and no one is ever dreaming of having a conditionality question for Greece or Malta or Bulgaria and others. And this is because is not the Article 7 process as a basis. It has given so I think that all of the tools are very complementary, and indeed there was at one moment a bit of this idea in 2019-20 that the conditionality would be the miracle and it would save immediately, and then the government in Hungary would feel so bad not to have any money anymore, they would completely change in one day everything because they would need the money so much. And that is, I was often very surprised by some of my colleagues in the European Parliament, some discourse in the Commission, some discourse also in member states. So I think that on this, Vera Jourova and me, we are on the very same page. I am often frustrated with the Commission indeed, but it's not specifically on the conditionality, it's on a number of things. And to be very clear, I'm less frustrated with Vera Jourova than with most of the other commissioners, because I think that she did a very courageous term this term, and it's very interesting because she also comes from a not easy background. She comes from Babiš party in Czech Republic, and that was not the best rule of law applier either, but she really made of her mandate something. So that's, I think it comes back to the first question that you asked. Conditionality is firstly an economical tool to protect EU money, basically to protect EU taxpayers. And it doesn't come from France at all. It comes from them, it comes from Netherlands, it comes from these frugal countries that don't want their money to be misused. And I'm very clear on that. And I have no, you know, I'm not naive on that. I think it's important that they are there to say that. It's not, I am unhappy with Netherlands when they don't want to put money for Greece or others, but I also think that it's very good that you have these people saying, we are all putting in common money, and we want this money not to be misused. And the track record of Hungary on corruption is so bad that it was normal that one moment some people would say, we're not going on with this. And that's what I was saying earlier, is that it's also a question that comes back with enlargement and with Ukraine and with Moldova. Will we open to all of these people if our money is always in danger? So it was that the first thread, and it works very well with Hungary. It's not that easy to use for Poland, for example, that does not have this record of misuse of European money. So it has also very concrete implication on how then we use the tool, because indeed when it was negotiated in a very difficult moment under the German presidency, there was clearly this link to the protection of the EU money. Now, it becomes a political tool if you also say, you know, it's not only about protecting the EU money, it's also about our values, our common values. And we are using it as a political tool. It's true. I don't shy from that. I'm very clear about that. And I think we should. But then, again, it cannot be the only political tool that we use. First, because it's not always efficient, and we're seeing this at the moment. It has not made change come so fast in Hungary, and will it make change anyway? I mean, I think that for the moment, the government in Hungary is thinking, well, we are gaining time, we'll wait for the next term, and maybe the next term is more in our favor, and we will get the money anyway. So it's not such an efficient and miraculous tool, and also because indeed, we cannot only be in the punishment of a country and its citizens and preventing people from having money if we don't use the other political tools that we have, because then I find it very nasty, and people, the ones that are punished the most, are not the ones that are the most problematic. And I think that if we never go through the Article 7 process, and we never go to the final point where member states, which is clearly not doing what is being done, it needs to be done because of the government, not the citizen. The Hungarian citizens, they didn't decide all of this. This government, if it does never get a sanction, and what sanction can it have? It can have withdrawing of voting rights. That's the only sanction that is really, really, really going to be efficient. Because, and the presidency, I mean, I don't understand why we are so shy about the Hungarian presidency, because what the benefit for a Hungarian citizen of a presidency? None. I mean, who cares? You know, most of the citizens don't even know their country are having the presidency. The ones that are profiting from a presidency are the governments. They're the ones that can be on a scene, they are the ones having a podium, they are the ones talking about international relations and all this. And so presidency could be a tool to sanction directly the government and not the citizens. Withdrawing voting rights and it would prevent them, Orban to have a blackmail leverage. All of these are political decisions, and they need to be taken next to the conditionality, because if you only have the economical sanctions, it's not going to function. And so it comes back to, and I would like to answer here, I think it's not about giving more power on one side or on the other, but it is about thinking of European citizens in general, not a French citizens next to a Dutch citizens next to an Hungarian citizens. It's what we can do for European citizens and how we can protect values for all of them, and them benefiting from the same rights and the same liberties wherever they live in this EU. That's the final goal. It's not, do I have power on health? Do I have power on single market and all this? This is technical things, and we can discuss subsidiarity, who gets what competencies. But the fact that wherever you live in this EU, you benefit from the same rights and the same liberties, that is why we want rule of law efficient for everyone.
Thank you very much. Just, I suppose, before I open it to the floor, and so please start preparing your questions, I guess, of course, just, you know, in response to you there, that, of course, European citizens want their money to be held accountable. But I guess an argument from the Hungarian government and from many national citizens, they would remind you at this point that they are dual citizens in a way. They're also citizens of their own countries, and they feel often a resentment towards a European Union which doesn't communicate with them. The whole concept of a European citizen is quite new, not for people in Germany, of course, but for many citizens of Hungary, of Bulgaria, of Romania, of France or Spain, for that matter, and for many British citizens. It's a pretty young idea still, which I, as a European, hope will grow. But at this point, the floor. I warned you you'd have a chance to speak. Please take the opportunity. Yeah, thank you. And we'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then to the panel, try and make them as concise as possible, please. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was waiting for the microphone, but I'll improvise about. Sorry, Alex Holiday, sometime sparring partner of Boris on Twitter. Lovely to meet you in person. Sorry, what the interpreters you need, Mike? Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Boris, you talked about the pendulum and a certain corrective motion, and your hope that eventually the media landscape in Hungary would balance somewhere in the middle. Bearing in mind that background, how far from having a balanced media market would you say Hungary is at the moment, and what is the route for getting there, to that point of equilibrium?
Thank you. Can we take a couple more questions? Peter, try and please, the question as short as possible, please.
Yes. Would you agree that we should rely more on the national traditions of member states supporting rule of law? For example, the tradition of freedom of the press in countries, in member states. In Hungary, that's a wonderful and powerful tradition. Because if I agree with the argument that we should make it a much emphasized common European value, all what we are talking about. But if that's presented rather as an abstract set of values and a practice needed for self-governing political community, then we may lose the debate against those who can say that this is our national tradition. And it's there. We just have to say that in that sense we are also conservative. Would you agree with that?
And one more question, if there is one more. Yeah, thank you. Just here. Or I can't see any.
Thank you so much. A question to Ms. Delbos-Corfield and John. Ms. Delbos-Corfield, you already mentioned practically the strategy of the Orban regime and the long game, and it's just sitting out the uncomfortable periods, waiting for the next European Parliament, waiting for the next US administration. My question is, what can be the rational long game for the European Union in this exchange? Can it be something more with an eye on the limited transformative effect of the conditionality than just having practically a peaceful coexistence in a Cold War between the Democratic Union and authoritarian member states, where the parties practically have just one goal, trying to survive each other? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Boris, would you like to take that first question?
First of all, I apologize for saying it was France. It was then the Netherlands, and France was only an influential supporter. I would also like to reflect on your words, Mrs. Pardavi, that the European Court of Justice, how nice it is that we have it as a place for last recourse. Only would it not be nice to have a European Court of Appeals? Because in the national judicial system you can appeal any court decision, but in the EU you cannot. And that's the extent of that. Yes, for the media, if you read statistics on what Hungarian media consumers read, where they get their news from, you will find that more than 80% read media that are, or consume media that are friendly to the government, and more than 80% consume media that are critical of the government, meaning they just want to know what's going on. They read both. And you have to, because we have a very polarized media landscape. So readers want objective media. If you talk to journalists in different media outlets, you will see they also don't like to follow a political narrative, and that is true for left-wing as well as right-wing papers. You have those who are very convinced of their political battle, but others just want to do normal journalism. Last but least, it's a market mechanism. So if you do not cater to readers, media consumers, if you do not satisfy what they're interested in, if you don't report about that, but you try to follow some other narrative, then you will not be successful on the market. It's expensive, and that will have an economic pressure forcing you to find your way back to readers. Also, media freedom is guaranteed threefold by the media law, by the Constitution, and by European law. And that being the case, if a large segment of the population is not represented in the media, that means a market for media investors who can then go and found a media outlet. But here we have a big problem with the new European Media Freedom Act, but that's not the subject of our discussion today.
Thank you. Yeah, Gwendolyn.
So to answer the first question, I'm not sure I understand it. I'm already going to answer the national tradition question. I'm not convinced about national traditions. I think sometimes it's an argument to say that what would be our common democracy and common liberties, we can adapt to our national stories. And I'm not going to give you Hungarian examples. So no, I don't think it's a French national tradition to have so much excessive police violence on each of our demonstrations. I don't think it's a very good national tradition. I don't think that it's a very good Dutch tradition to have had algorithm put people out of social system for decades and this not being corrected. I don't think it's a Polish tradition to have ladies dying from a dead fetus in them on a hospital bed and no doctors intervening like 100 years ago. So yeah, I have a big difficulty with national tradition. Talking about the press freedom landscape in Hungary, I know all the arguments and I even agree with some of them. If there is a country where you don't have even 2 hours of detention of a journalist, and I come from a country where journalists on each demonstration, and 50 of them, sometimes hundreds of them, get a few hours of detention, so I know that very well. If there is a country where you don't detain journalists, it's Hungary. If there is a country where they are not having trials, it's Hungary. I'm very surprised by the number of Hungarian journalists that decide to become a cab driver or live in another country or do completely something else of their lives. I just wonder why, you know. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I think that it's very problematic that the Budapest mayor is never on national TV. It's not about just what people want to see, it's about what you accept to give to the people. And media pluralism is also to give a place for everyone. You can disagree with the Budapest mayor, but when it's the mayor of so many people of this country, imagine if in France the Paris mayor was never on TV, national TV. So this is things where I think that on the EU level we can advance so that in all countries that sort of media pluralism exists. I know that there's independent media in journalism, but I also know that none of the money goes to them and all of the money goes to others. And I also know that we have a structure called KESMA where we have very little transparency, and that's one of the EU Media Freedom Act big goals is to have more transparency, be it on the public sector or on the private, because in some member states it's the private sector which is a problem with huge concentration. We need to have a clear vision of who owns the media and why this editorial narrative is privileged to another one in the media. So I think that on this we can make a big improvement. On the rational long time, I don't know, and I'm very worried. So yeah, I mean, that's the only thing that I can answer. Either the polls are right, and we do go to a very conservative European Union in general, in Parliament, in Member States, in Commission, and people are not fighting anymore. So it is a risk. It's not the polls that are right. What is the very big problem today, and you can feel it in Parliament, is everyone has stopped fighting. Social Democrats, who are the biggest challengers, they're already saying, you know, next term we cannot do anything, okay, let's leave it. So I think that it's very bad, 8 months before to have already been defeated. So either we have this situation, and I think that we will see EU die from this inside. Not the single market will exist, the consumer things will exist, the EU money will exist, the administration will exist. We'll never kill the EU administration now that it's created, but it will have no values, it will have no common project. Or we still have people fighting, civil society being listened to, parliamentaries that really want to fight, and member states that are a bit more courageous. This is really what we need. We need Council to be courageous, and we can overcome.
Thank you. Our time is up. I'd like to thank all of the panelists. I'd like to thank all of you for being here and sticking it through. And perhaps just a final quote from the Commissioner, which I think we could probably all agree with. Protecting the rule of law is not a task just for EU institutions, not just for national authorities. It's something for each and every one of us. And on that note, thank you all, the panel. Thank you for being here, and have a nice evening.